All right, it's still your favorite program, and we're still looking at sustainable development across the globe. We started from Germany to look at what is obtainable there, and now it's time for us to head to India, where we're going to talk about the power generation in India. India made history as the second largest coal user in the world when it comes to electricity generation. Let's see how this is going to play out and what our in-house guests will have to say about this. We're being joined by the wise man, Dr. Idahosa Osamhanze. Glad you have joined us this morning.
Femi, good morning. Blessing.
Good morning.
Good morning. Oh, I like this blue. It was
you
good
to join
that
the
I
club,
have to
the blue club.
I almost put on the blue suit.
Oh, that's the spirit of early exchange.
But on the second
What
thought,
do I have to do to ensure that I'm the only one wearing a particular color?
I decided
Nobody
to
twins
change
with
my
me.
color.
Just accept the trend. And
Don't worry, I'll think on something.
All right, it's good for us to live as a family. Now, let's get back to the discussion. Looking at the global effort to decarbonize, activities, you've said 2050, and now you have India going into coal-fired electricity, becoming the second largest coal user in the world. What do you make of this development?
Well, for me, it's neither here nor there. And I think in the whole conversation about the sustainability debate, the world must be able to triangulate the three P or aspects of sustainable development, which is to say we have to look at one, the economy, we look at two, the people, and then of course the planet. And we will not be able to take these three in isolations. They have to be taken holistically. And I think this is where the whole argument about this sustainable transition is, for me, a debate that especially people from the third world and emerging nations are really not handling very well. The white had gone up that far in terms of development, and then we're seeing that we here back third world, we're suffering two terrible things. Number one, we're having poverty as a challenge, and of course we're asking that the world had to get off poverty. And two, we're also looking at people who are suffering and dying as a result of the development that is happening in the world. Right now, in strategic studies, you see people talking about the correlation between the civil crisis across third world countries, especially in Africa, with the development that is happening in the world. So we have to look at this narrative first and foremost. You take cobalt from Africa, you take lithium from Africa, you take crude oil from Africa to light up Europe. And Africa is in darkness on one hand, for example. And of course, where you are doing mining, this so-called non-renewable, to push the renewable agenda, people are dying of degradation. And that's why, of course, people are asking, look, Africa contributes less than 4% to carbon emission globally, but the causes or the effect or the consequence of carbon emission is higher and major in this part of the world. Now, this has been the debate. For years, India had been without electricity like just every African country, until Modi came and see how do we fix the energy condition in India, because it is critical to the survival of India, because poverty was also sprawling in India. And what has Modi to do was to put all sorts of energy in the basket. So while we are talking about the CO2 emission from the coal plant, we must also not forget that India has also invested so much in wind energy. They have also invested in some solar energy, and put them in the basket to be able to reach the provision of electricity for its people. And as we speak today, India is not just providing electricity for its citizens, it's also selling electricity to about 4 nations around its borders. And that for me is quite remarkable. And when you look at the economic side of all this conversation, India today remains the fastest growing economy globally, because for economy to grow, you need energy. And I think this is where really Africa needs to borrow a leaf from India.
Talking about borrowing a leaf from India, what do you think made India turn to the use of coal, which is giving them lots of energy? But what they were sustaining on before, the regular means of generating power, wind, hydro and all, was even dropping. The amount of power it was giving them was dropping. Why is it like coal is the new found energy source that the world is going to?
You know, it is a hypocrisy, even in the conversation that, of course, we also would need to also take a look at. I remember a few years ago, Oxfam was advocating for sustainable energy, and people were asking. They did a wristband from Indonesia that said, "Oh, let's green our world." And the factory that was producing that wristband were using child labor to produce the wristband. And say, what a hypocrisy. Now, you ask anywhere in the world, even including the most developed countries in the America, in Europe, are they using coal? Coal is not just a new source of energy. When there was this Ukrainian-Russia war, and gas supply to Germany became so expensive, didn't Germany revert back to using of coal to generate electricity? They did. You see, this is a bivalent nature we find in the world. You are seeing a conversation that some people measure some certain things, and that's why yesterday I was saying in the other show that, look, you see, science is not as objective as people think. It's where people have value. When we're looking at, people are looking for survivor, which for me is critical. You can imagine the number and quantum of people that Modi has lifted out of poverty. In the last 8 years, over 100 million people have been moved out of poverty in India because of electrification. And I think that for me should be celebrated, really. That you're saying that the people's side of the conversation for the sustainability, this guy is doing his best. But they are not all coal. There's also the wind, there's also the thermal, the hydro, there's also the solar part of these things. But the entire energy mix is what India is happening. You see, but this conversation we see every time that you see people are putting you out on the template to say, oh, you are the worst emitter of carbon. I really don't see that. See, in Chinese take the raw material from Africa to build the factories that are producing even the so-called renewable energy from non-renewable source in Africa. So we should allow India to be, really. And this is where Africa itself also need to first of all survive. And I think our president was actually making such a comparison the last time while he was doing his campaign, that if the West had done a whole lot in terms of benefiting, we should be able to be allowed to grow on our own terms and using innovation to see how can we reduce emission through value engineering for India. And I think that should be left to the Indian scientists to do and see how can reduce the emission of CO2 in India using value engineering. But to say that, India is a threat to the world, I don't so believe. And I think the argument should be much more than that, because we have to find a way to ensure that people survive while we are preserving the planet. Because I don't think it's animal that will live in the planet.
All right, let's look critically at what India has done with coal. They've been able to generate 115 terawatts. And 1 terawatt is equivalent to 1 trillion watts. We use megawatts here, and that's about 1 terawatt is equivalent to 1 million megawatts. But they've done 115 terawatts. How commendable is that? And what kind of lessons are here for other nations, looking at what India has done with coal?
You see, it's not just is to look comprehensively at the program of the President of India, Modi. What he has done in the last 8 years was to clean up the system. And if you see, one of the real arguments against power in Africa, for example, is the fact that there's no right pricing. And because pricing is not right, a lot of investment is not coming into Africa for the power sector. Because what you see is that government use power like a social service and say, oh, it's critical to security and national survival, and therefore we have to handle it. And so we don't allow people to come into that value chain. So we control the price of electricity. So the people who are investing in that energy sector are not really able to make money. And so the business is not attractive. Because like we know from Business 101, the goal of every entrepreneur is to make profit. And if you are not making profit possible for an entrepreneur, of course, he will not get into that business. So Modi understood that very clearly. And so what he started to do was to look at what was the source of the problem, why there was no right pricing. And he found out that the elite in India were actually using the poor as an argument for poor pricing of electricity in India. So say, oh, if we raise the price, the poor will suffer. And the poor were going to die. And Modi was thinking how to be able to address this situation. And so what he did first and foremost was to start the registration of Indian citizens across the globe. And he succeeded in giving ID card to every Indian citizen. About 1.3 million people spent about $1 billion US in 8 years to provide identification for everybody. And so it was clear from the dashboard who were the real poor Indians. So Modi was able to see that, look, okay, about 300 million Indians were actually very poor and they will not be able to buy electricity at the right price. And so he decided to do direct subsidy to the 300 million poor Indians. So assume the cost of energy, let's use, is $1, the right price. And of course, they've been selling at 40 cents. Modi transfer the remaining 60 cents to these 300 million people directly into their bank accounts. And because they have all been registered, they all have cards and number attached to it, that you can know their data wherever they are and see that these people actually were poor and they don't have money anywhere because of one code for identification. Then they were able to put money in the purse of these people. Now what happened? All the big men that were benefiting from subsidy, hitherto, using the poor who were living in darkness, had no more arguments to say the poor were going to pay. So right now as we speak, India is paying right price for electricity. And this attracted investors into India and they put money. And what you're seeing today is as a result of cleaning up the system. And we're not hanging in one angle to be saying, oh, some people will suffer if we remove subsidy. And India has dealt with that system. And this is what many African leaders need to do, to be able to clean the system and see who actually is benefiting from subsidy. We subsidize petrol, and somebody come to warfare without any. Sanusi told us this in 2013, how people were offloading 10 vessels in a day in our wharf that cannot take one vessel. And they bring the paper to Abuja to NNPC for payment. So we were funding and subsidizing the rich. And that is why we have not gotten it right. Because if this is priced rightly, you will have the right kind of investor come into the industry, put money in there, and then of course electricity will no longer become a problem for many African countries. But elite will not allow this to happen, because as they continue to benefit from the system of subsidy, they will not want that subsidy to go. You just imagine that you are doing cash transfer now. The president say, oh, cash transfer is going to start in May, and they give you 10 billion naira for cash transfer, and you just put this one in maybe whether it's in the capital market or you put it in the money market, and after 30 days you bring it out, you have made so much money. Isn't it? Now, this is the kind of trading that is going on. And so some people are benefiting, and we are using the poor as argument that if we remove it, people will suffer. And then, of course, we continue to fund corruption, and we are not seeing light. I saw a map today that really triggered my thinking. In the daytime, global map, Africa has the brightest of vision. And in the night, we are the darkest.
All right. Correcting that darkness now, using the case of India, what they've been able to do, right, to make sure that in the energy mix, the coal-fired plants give them 80% as compared to what used to be. That's a huge success. But give an example, what you also said about attracting investors because of the right pricing. What can be done here? How can it happen? In Africa or in Nigeria specifically, the data is not even there. If you are to pay the subsidy directly to the users, how would that even happen?
You see, yesterday I was explaining to my friend what Moscal and Pareto wrote in one of their theses on what they call the theory of the circulation of the elite in most of the third world country, how we sit down and think about how to perpetuate the poverty of the people. And every time I look at the theorization of Moscow, I see it play out in Africa here. For example, there's no rocket science in terms of identifying who we are as a country. The only reason why it hasn't been possible is because the elite that are benefiting from the system do not want the system to end. And that's why I feel that what we need in Africa, we need a leader who is intellectually very savvy and understanding how the elite are corrupting the system and making it not to work. And then, of course, just have to be ahead of them in terms of thinking to pull them down, which is what Modi did in India. And don't forget that Modi, before he became the Prime Minister of India, had a lot of baggage. He was seen to be a cowboy and a very bad boy. And people really didn't expect him to win the election. But of course, he put reform forward because he also know how these things were working. And for Modi, this was the time that India had to succeed. And then he's pushing the agenda to see India succeed. And so we are seeing India emerging and moving its citizens off poverty radar. But the elite here who are conniving, they collaborate to impoverize the people, are the one that will not allow this thing to say, well, these issues we are talking about, they are not rocket science. They are within our space. We can register Nigerians in one day.
Really? 200 million people?
Oh, yes. In one day. If we say today and said, everybody go to your local government and put your data down, everybody will be there. Wherever we are, we will queue. But the truth of the matter is that after this queue, people will not allow. See, there are a lot of things that we need to do today that internet has put in our disposal. You are opening bank account today online. Isn't that true?
True.
Everybody on a smartphone gets to the bank app, type your name, upload your credentials, and forward it. We don't need 2 years to register ourselves. We don't even need too much money. The only thing that is the problem is that those who will benefit from the registration process, who want booths to be built, where people are going to say, who want to hire canopy, those people who want to hire generator to power the device, will not allow this simple process to work. So this is the issue and this is the challenge that most African nations face, because everything is about contract. And because we have overcontracted our life, nothing seems working. So the starting point is that if everybody has a BVN, for example, as we do, or national identity number that identify every Nigerian, so whichever means whatever thing you have is digitized. So if you go to land registry and put your number, whether BVN or NIN number, all the landed property you have in this world will show. If you put your BVN number, where your account is in any bank will show. We will know the balance that is there. So we will be able to actually determine the poor of the poorest. And then work out a modality to address this poor of the poorest so that we can have right pricing that will attract investors to come. Because there is no investor who will come into a system and will say, okay, I want to sink in money here, but I don't want to make profit. You can't find such investors. So this is what people are talking about, creating an ecosystem that will make investment profitable. Then people can put money.
Interesting. You know, it is often said there are two sides to a coin, you know.
They are a third side now.
Oh, interesting. I would love to know that, maybe after now. But the point I'm making is India is they've made significant progress with coal, generating about 115 terawatts. On the other hand, they are also creating another problem, which is the carbon.
Which is what every technology do.
Which is now.
It's not just carbon. It's not just coal. Every technology in the world that has ever been made, all of them have their own sides.
But if you look at the statistics now, is the record, in fact, is the highest so far. Over 100 million metric tons of CO2
yes.
now. Isn't that significant?
Oh, yes.
Or someone would just like, okay, I solved the problem of electricity.
Yes.
Does it matter the other side, which is the emission that have been produced here?
You see, I was sharing with in the other program yesterday, who is supposed to be suffering this CO2? Are Indian people complaining? Why are you complaining for them?
Do they need to complain, or is it something that the effects may not be felt now, but over time?
That is what, who is complaining? Why are you complaining for India?
Because it's a global, fight.
See, this global conspiracy, we must have to get a way to deconstruct some of all these things. Yes, America has developed technology they call the carbon capture storage system, which is still being fathomed out to see how much carbon is being emitted. You see, some of all these issues, people really need to query it and see how it works. How we assign value to some of all these things that we cannot capture. So how I put tonnage, for example, to a carbon emitted on a car, and I'm able to calculate that is actually 1 or 2 tons. You see, the old adage that if you want to kill a dog,
give it a bad
you
name.
give it a bad name. It all plays out in international politics, and these are some of the issues that, of course, the world must be wary of. Because somehow, some people who have been benefiting from the international system want to continue to benefit, and therefore put tax on some certain people when they say they are making some advanced progress. And this is what people call neo-colonialism. That you see that somebody who you are supposed to be called a slave is making some advancement, and therefore the advancement is very irritating, and some people sit around table and decide to design theory to pull down that kind of development. These are issues that we must also look at. Yeah, you see, why this conversation not started from Copenhagen in 1995 of saying, oh, how do we really deal with the issue of climate change? And they say, throw away your fridge. Throw away the old technology. We did. But it is on record today that even the depletion of the ozone layer is done more by natural force than any so-called emission in science. So these are the arguments that we have to put on the table. When they're saying, oh, emission is killing people, how are we going to really account for this number of people that have been killed? How are we not sure that the people who are advocating this, the use of CO2 destroying the planet, are actually not because they they have already developed alternative source. Because energy has become so expensive, and the only source that comes from it is from Africa, and this is therefore, and the third world countries who have been their platform for development are always been victim, and they don't want to see them grow. That's the real problem here. So for me, really, I see a lot of conspiracy in some of all these arguments. Since 2015, COP21, about energy financing, which it was said that Africa will need, for example, for that transition, about $246 billion annually as investment and as reparation from the West, who are the ones that are creating these CO2 emission, because we are generating less and they are generating the more, and they are using it to punish us, that they should pay us. How many of these Western nations has committed to that financing? None. Now, what are they doing right now? In the last COP28 meeting, you want to start to give us loan. See, debt financing and official development financing for third world to buy your technology. This is what you see here. So I feel nations should be allowed to actually grow. That's what sovereignty should mean for us. Yes, we agree with all this theorization, but also to see to the extent, because who is giving us this principle? So we should allow India to measure their CO2 emission and develop their own technology to deal with the problem, because every technology has its own side effect. There even medication we take, don't they have side effects? They do.
But this is huge, over
so
100 billion metric tons.
Are we going to say because medication has side effects that when people are sick, they should not use them?
Isn't there a need to strike a balance?
Yeah, but that is a responsible use. That's what we're talking about. What is important, first and foremost, is to provide life for the people who are in India so that they can survive. So if they have food to eat and they are living well, then they will be able to think of how to reduce the effect of whatever thing that they are emitting. But to say that they have to stay out of it so that they can remain in darkness, and when you are not making provision for the so-called renewable energy, I think that is asking too much from the very poor.
Now, you have said that there is always something to pay for when a new technology comes. Now, in the case of reducing carbon emission, you seem to feel like there's some politics around it. What is the way to go from here in creating that balance? Some time ago, we're told that, there's need for planting of trees and some other things to absorb the carbon in the atmosphere. Is that not something practicable, or is not enough to absorb the amount of carbon being emitted into the atmosphere so that these technologies can actually continue?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with all the postulations about the possibility or the effect of carbon on the environment. But I also want to advance an alternative kind of a theory or a model to look at these issues, really. That is not the problem of climate issues, really, which are very obvious and significant across the globe, may not necessarily be coming from CO2. There's a whole lot that civilization has done to the human ecosystem. And this for me are quite instructive. As a little boy who grew up in a village, when I see honey today, and the honey that I used to know, you know that there's differences in taste. Because the thing that the honey used to feed on those days are no longer available for the honey. So what they are producing now is different from what they used to produce. And this is because civilization had driven nature to a point where this natural thing that God has put into existence for us, that's conditioning how we are living, has been destroyed by human civilization. That is, for me, the real issue that the world also have to look into. We made this world. No science created it. And we cannot run away from the fact that the world just emerged, like they said in the Big Bang Theory. The two organisms just suddenly sprang up and then the world evolved. We can't go to that kind of thinking. It's absurd. And so science must get to the point of accepting that this world we live in, we met it. And there's a superhuman being who put this structure in place. And how this thing should work, he also put it in place. And why in search of comfort, we have destroyed some of all these things that are actually responsible for the kind of climate that we are seeing today. We are pushing the ocean. We are driving it out. All these issues, we also need to account for them because they are natural issues. So we can't just stay here and be arguing that it is carbon CO2 that is responsible for the climate change. That for me is a simplistic argument as far as I'm concerned. So we need to be able to really even define what these impacts are really when you talk about CO2 impact. Can we shut down for one day and see whether the climate will restore? Everything, maybe the whole world. We shut down for 6 months during the COVID. No ship moving, no car moving. The world was a standstill. Were there no climate issue? These are the things that we need to be frank with ourselves. If there is no economy around these things, I would be having this argument or suspicion. Right. But there's a whole lot of economy around it because some people are mining dollars from these issues. They take cobalt from your place at ridiculous prices. They turn it into what they call the EV vehicles and they sell it to you as exorbitant prices. You are always the one bearing the brunt.
But why is that easy to do? What is the role of Africa that is making this conspiracy easy to happen?
It's the laziness of thinking. The very laziness of thinking. That we as black people, that anything they throw to us, we put it on the table, we accept it hook, line, and sinker. Nobody want to talk about it. Nobody want to criticize this. They say, oh, it came from Harvard, it came from Stanford, and therefore it is correct.
But we have lots of intellectuals, professors of sciences here.
This is a problem. So we use Harvard, we use Stanford, we use Yale as our standard to even measure what we are doing because we have no confidence in what we can do. This is the real issue.
All right. Let's stay on the subject here because if we go this route, that's a conversation for another day. Now, let's look at what India has done with coal generation when it comes to electricity. Now, if you look at other sources, it's looking at the generation from coal at the expense of other sources. Let me read out the statistics to you. Coal generation came as an output from solar, wind, and hydro facilities dropped by 3%, 19%, and 21.5% respectively. So as much as India has generated so much electricity from coal, but the output also from wind, solar has dropped. How do you reconcile this? What do you make of the energy mix in India and then the need or the advocacy for transition into renewable energy?
Femi, you see,
isn't there any to what am I arguing?
I saw the argument.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to see it in other perspective. the law of competitive advantage for you as a person, which is cheaper for me to do, and is going to give me the maximum return. Where do I need to put my energy? Do I need this heavy investment in this area and get low yield? Or I should put my focus in this place where I can easily get the maximum yield?
And interestingly, India has coal in abundance.
So the law of competitive advantage, and this is what it is, because nations compete in three different ways. It's either you're competing on price, you're getting something cheaper, or you're competing on something differentiation. You are able to differentiate your offering from what other people are offering. Otherwise, you have to do what every other person is doing and play in the right ocean, which likely will consume you. And then think in a world where people are having advantage, where nature has blessed you, you should be able to take advantage of those things and make more of it, rather than constitute or channel your energy to sources that are going to cost you more and be feeding other nations at the expense of your own people. That's my view.
All right, so going forward, the companies that are into production or that are looking into making other kinds of technology available that will not emit carbon. For now, many of them are just trying out things. It's not yet feasible how much of new technologies they can create for these other companies, but money is going into that. What is the hope that in the very near time, even the target that the world has set for itself, the transition, the full-scale transition from fossil fuel, another source of energy that emits lots of carbon, will be completed?
Well, it's a very, very fundamental question that you are asking. But I'm also afraid that I may not have a straight answer to it. And the reason is very simple. People have peculiar problems. And I think problems are also, to a very large extent, geographic. And which is to say that for every geographic problem, the solution is within those geography. And people should allow to find out solution to what happened. You see, one of the things that keep reverberating in my mind as I sit here is what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. Some African doctors were advocating that some malaria drugs which we were used to could manage COVID and in some cases help people to recover. We were told by WHO, engineered by the West, that because of the side effect, which is not known or seen, that the use of those drugs, managing those things, should be discouraged. While we wait for them to develop a vaccine that never existed. And when they finish developing the vaccine, they wrote on the vaccine that if the vaccine kill you, you cannot hold the pharmaceutical company that produces it responsible because it's a trial. And the entire world accepted it. This for me is unacceptable. And this is the real thing that Africans, and then indeed the entire third world, must begin to look at and take their destiny in their own hand and stop leaving it in the hand of these people who only think about what to profit from Africa. Those who are buying cobalt from Africa, those who are buying lithium from Africa, those who are buying gold from Africa, those who are buying crude oil from Africa, they don't have crisis. All the places where these raw materials are taken from, there are perpetual crises. Why? These are for me the fundamentals, and this is where we really need to have honest conversation. So that somebody don't throw something at your face and tell you it's scientific, And therefore, because we have all, our head has all been screwed in such a way to think the way they want us to think, and nobody can even say, let's put it down and look at it our own way and do our own thing. And until Africa or indeed the entire world start to do things their own way, some people will continue to take advantage of other people. Every scientific endeavor take a process. So Africans or third world people should also be given, or the emerging economies be given the opportunity to evolve like they have done. That's my way of looking at it.
All right, let's wrap up with this. Looking at what India has done with coal, will you suggest that Nigeria should take or replicate that example?
As long as we solve our energy problem, I am 100% sink.
As long as it solves the problem.
All right, we'll leave it there. 100% into creating sustainable energy for Nigeria. At least we won't be hearing of the national grid collapse off and on.
Yeah, of course, we will not. At least we'll be able to sell energy and they have proper money. And then, of course, our young people who are looking for a job, they have something to channel their energy into. Because the electrification of all things is so important to world civilization and development. And that is one single technology that has transformed the entire world. And of course, Africans and indeed Nigeria, we have not benefited from that technology. And I think it's the right time, while we are studying other things that can be better than wind, that can be better than hydro, that can be better than sunshine as source of energy, as nature may want us to have it. Let's make use of what we have to get what we want.
Thank you very much, Idahosa Osamhanze, for your thoughts on the show today, on the issues that we've discussed. Yes, let's see what happens with energy, what each country would do, and let's see if the target that the world is giving itself to have zero carbon emission for Germany is 2045. For most of the world, that's what they're looking at. Let's see how feasible it becomes. But I think that research has to be done to ensure that we get there fast, and we also make good money from the resources that we have. But the earth preservation, very important.
I do hope so. Ultimately, our lives are in the hands of God and not in the hand of science.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.